Picture this: 2 villages, hundreds of men, 1 ball, and absolutely no rules. People didn't just get hurt playing this game. They died. Bones broke, shops got smashed, and at least one English king got so fed up he made it illegal. This violent, chaotic, borderline riot of a sport is the great-great-grandfather of the most popular game on planet Earth. Today, football is played in every country, watched by billions, and worth around 400 billion euros a year. But to understand how we got from a medieval mob brawl to packed stadiums, Messi, and the World Cup, you have to go back more than 2,000 years, through ancient empires, a very violent Middle Ages, an awkward argument about hands, and a few wars along the way. This is the complete history of football, and it starts nowhere near England. Let's rewind about 2,300 years to ancient China. Around the 3rd century BC, soldiers of the Han dynasty played a game called Cuju, which translates very honestly to kickball. They'd kick a leather ball stuffed with feathers and hair through a small hole in a net strung between bamboo poles. And here's the part that matters: you were not allowed to use your hands. Sound familiar? FIFA itself officially recognizes Cuju as the earliest version of the game, so no, football wasn't dreamed up by Victorian Englishmen. It was invented by bored Chinese soldiers 2,000 years before that. China wasn't alone. In ancient Greece they played episkairos, 2 teams flinging and kicking a ball over each other's line. The Romans took one look, said, "We'll have that," and turned it into harpastum, a brutal, muddy possession game their soldiers used to stay fit. And wherever Roman soldiers marched, the ball games went with them, spreading across Europe. So at this point, there's no single sport called football. There are dozens of versions, in dozens of cultures, all built on the same simple, irresistible human urge: grab a ball, pick a goal, cause chaos. And chaos is exactly where this goes next. Fast forward to medieval Europe, around the 12th century, and we're back at that village brawl from the start. In England, they called it mob football. In France, Soul. The rules? There basically weren't any. A match might be one whole village against the next, and the goal could be a church door, a landmark, or sometimes just a pond, miles away. Teams could be hundreds of people. Kick the ball, carry it, tackle a guy into a hedge. Whatever worked. It wasn't really a sport. It was a sanctioned riot. People got trampled, towns got wrecked, and players genuinely died. In 1314, King Edward II had had enough and flat-out banned it, threatening prison for anyone caught playing. Other kings added their own bans over the centuries. Did any of it work? Of course not. People loved it too much. For roughly 500 years, football stayed exactly like this, gloriously violent, totally unregulated, and impossible to kill, until the 1800s, when a bunch of posh English schoolboys decided to ruin the fun by adding rules. By the early 1800s, England's schools and universities had a problem. They all played football, but every school played it differently. Some let you carry the ball, some banned hands entirely, some were basically organized wrestling. So when 2 schools met, they'd waste half the match just arguing about whose rules they were using. Sometimes they'd literally play one half by one school's rules and the second half by the others. The Industrial Revolution turned up the pressure. Railways meant teams could finally travel to play distant rivals. But you can't have a national sport if nobody agrees what the sport actually is. So in 1857, a few enthusiasts in Sheffield founded Sheffield FC, the oldest independent football club in the world, a club that existed for one reason: to play football. They wrote their own rulebook. Others did too. The pressure was building. Then came the big one. On the 26th of October, 1863, representatives from 11 London clubs crammed into a pub, the Freemasons' Tavern, to settle it once and for all. They formed the Football Association, the first governing body in history, and agreed on a single official set of rules. But not everyone bought in. One faction wanted to keep handling the ball and, honestly, kicking each other in the shins. The dribbling side won. So in 1871, the handling clubs stormed off and founded their own sport, rugby football. That argument, in a London pub, is why we have 2 totally different games today. And here's the bit nobody tells you. The official name was Association Football. Posh students, being posh students, loved shortening words, so they took association and mangled it into soccer. That's it. That's the whole mystery. Soccer isn't some American thing. It's literally 1800s British slang. With real rules in place, football exploded. The FA launched the first FA Cup in 1871, the oldest national competition on earth. Matches settled into 90 minutes, 11 players aside, and, for the first time, a goalkeeper. The chaos finally had a shape. In 1872, England played Scotland in the first official international match. The score? A breathtaking 0. Forgettable games, historic moments. Football was now bigger than any single country. And this is where the British Empire accidentally became football's greatest marketing department. Britain ran the largest empire in history, and its workers, sailors, and engineers went everywhere. They built railways in Argentina, ran businesses in Brazil and Uruguay, set up clubs across Europe, and everywhere they went, they brought a ball. Locals took one look, fell in love, and made the game their own. Within a few decades, the British game belonged to the planet. But one group got shoved out of all this. In 1881, England and Scotland played the first women's international, and instead of being celebrated, the players were attacked by the crowd and had to flee in their carriage. For decades, women's football was mocked, restricted, and at times outright banned. Hold that thought. Their story doesn't end there. By 1900, football had a brand new problem. Every country now had its own association, its own rule tweaks, its own competitions, and absolutely nobody in charge of the whole thing. The fastest growing sport on earth had no referee. It needed a global authority, and in 1904, in Paris, it finally got one. On the 21st of May, 1904, 7 European nations met in Paris and founded FIFA, the Fédération Internationale de Football Association. The job, run international football and stop everyone from fighting about the rules. There was friction immediately. The country that invented the modern game, the UK, had 4 separate associations: England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. FIFA wanted one per country. The British flatly refused to merge. FIFA eventually caved and let all 4 in separately, which is why, to this day, England and Scotland play as different national teams. For a while, the Olympics were football's biggest stage. But the Olympics only allowed amateurs, and the best players were now professionals who got paid. So FIFA had an idea: run our own tournament, open to the pros, and crown a real world champion. In 1930, they did. The first ever World Cup, hosted by Uruguay, fresh off Olympic gold and celebrating 100 years of independence. They built a brand new stadium for it. One problem: getting there. In 1930, reaching Uruguay from Europe meant weeks at sea. Most European teams looked at the boat schedule and noped out. Only 4 showed up. And the final was pure chaos, which honestly feels appropriate. Uruguay versus Argentina, 2 neighbors who could not stand each other. Tensions were so high they could barely find a referee willing to take the job. And the one who agreed only did it on the condition that he'd be protected and could bolt straight afterward. The 2 teams couldn't even agree on whose ball to use, so they compromised. First half with Argentina's ball, second half with Uruguay's. Uruguay won 4-2. The World Cup was born. But the 1930s had a shadow over them. In 1934, the tournament was hosted by Mussolini's fascist Italy, who turned it into a propaganda show and conveniently won. Then, the world fell off a cliff. World War II shut football down completely. The 1942 and 1946 World Cups were cancelled. Stadiums were bombed, and players swapped their boots for uniforms. For 12 years, the biggest tournament on earth simply vanished. When the World Cup finally returned in 1950, in Brazil, it wasn't just sport. It was the world pressing play. Again, after a decade of war, Brazil built the Maracana, a monster stadium holding nearly 200,000 people, all expecting one thing: to watch Brazil win at home. They only needed a draw against Uruguay in the deciding match. The newspapers had already printed the victory headlines. The party had basically started. Then Uruguay won 2-1. The silence in that stadium became legendary. They call it the Maracanazo, and it's still remembered as one of the most devastating moments in the history of the game. An entire nation gutted, live, in real time. Through the 1950s, the sport got properly organized worldwide, with confederations springing up across Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Americas, finally linking the whole planet under one game. And in 1954, something quietly massive happened. The World Cup was televised for the first time. Suddenly, you didn't need a ticket. You could watch from your sofa. Football's audience jumped from thousands to millions almost overnight. Perfect timing, then, for the sport's first global superstar. In 1958, a skinny 17-year-old turned up at the World Cup in Sweden. His name was Edson Arantes do Nascimento, but the world would only ever call him Pelé. He scored twice in the final, won Brazil its first title, and basically invented the idea of the footballer as a worldwide icon. He'd go on to win 3 World Cups, still a record nobody has ever matched. So football now had rules, a global stage, television, and its first true legend. What it was about to get next was politics and money. A lot of money. As football got bigger, it lost the ability to stay out of the real world. It was the real world now. In 1969, tensions between El Salvador and Honduras, already boiling over politics and migration, erupted around 3 World Cup qualifiers between the two nations. Within days, an actual war broke out. It's literally remembered as the Football War, and it killed around 3,000 people. The matches didn't cause it, but they lit the fuse. The collisions kept coming. Apartheid South Africa was banned from international football. Cold War rivalries played out on the pitch. Military dictatorships used tournaments to look respectable. Football had simply become too big to sit out of anything. And then, in 1986, one man produced the most football moment in football history. In a World Cup quarter-final against England, Diego Maradona scored twice in 4 minutes, in completely opposite ways. The first, he punched the ball into the net with his hand and somehow got away with it, cheekily calling it the hand of God. The second, he collected the ball near the halfway line and dribbled past virtually the entire England team to score what's still called the greatest goal ever. Cheating and genius. 4 minutes apart. Argentina won the World Cup, and Maradona became a god. Then the money arrived. And it never left. In 1992, England rebranded its top flight as the Premier League, built on gigantic TV deals, and the floodgates opened. The old European Cup became the glamorous Champions League. Billionaires and entire nations started buying clubs, Russian oligarchs, Gulf states, Saudi funds, turning football into a multi-billion-dollar entertainment machine. Transfer fees went from millions to hundreds of millions, and in the middle of all that cash, the sport produced its greatest rivalry. For about 15 years, 2 players passed the title of best on earth, back and forth, Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. Between them, they won the Ballon d'Or, the prize for the world's best player, 13 times, dragging each other to impossible heights and shattering records that were supposed to be unbreakable. Whoever you picked, you are watching 2 of the greatest players who ever lived, in the same era, each one refusing to let the other win. People will argue about it forever. Meanwhile, the players shoved out a century earlier finally got their stage. After decades of bans and ridicule, the first FIFA Women's World Cup was held in 1991, and the women's game has exploded since, pulling record crowds, real investment, and global stars of its own. That crowd who chased the players off the pitch back in 1881 would not believe what their game became. But for all the glamour, modern football carries a darker bill too. Scandal followed the money. FIFA corruption cases, and tournaments handed to countries with serious questions hanging over them. The 2022 World Cup in Qatar was built, quite literally, by migrant workers, thousands of whom died on the construction sites, trapped in a system that left them with almost no rights. The beautiful game has an ugly price, and somebody always pays it. So here's where all that chaos ended up. That violent village brawl. The one kings tried to ban, the one people died playing. is now the most popular sport on the planet. It's played by around 275 million people, including 13 million women. It's watched by billions, and it generates something like 400 billion euros a year, from a leather ball stuffed with feathers in ancient China, to medieval villagers kicking each other into ponds, to a pub in London in 1863, to a stadium falling silent in Brazil, to a war in Central America, to two men in Spain rewriting what's humanly possible. It all grew from the same simple, stupid, beautiful idea: a ball. Two sides, one goal. 2,000 years later, we still can't stop playing. And the story isn't finished yet.